Um, we're gonna sync using the coolest toy ever. Action? I have to have a little fun. Okay. Anyway, welcome. We are going to be talking about personality judgment. We are all the way in module 5. So this is the last module before the test, which is soon. Well, or you're just watching these for fun later. But anyway, so we're going to talk about personality judgment because it matters more. The personality matters in lots of different ways, right? It matters in how it manifests itself in your behaviors, thoughts, and feelings, but also in the perceptions of others. And that's what this kind of section is mostly about. Okay, there we go. So here are our big objectives. We're going to discuss why the assessments you make of your personality and that of others are important. We are going to discuss the criteria that can be used for assessing accuracy, because accurate assessment also important. And lastly, the last chunk is going to be talking about the 4 moderators of accuracy and this model called the realistic accuracy model, called RAM, as a way to kind of think about the flow from input, from your personality to who is ever trying to perceive your personality and get a sense of it. So that's where we're going. Okay, so personality assessment. Everybody does this all the time. We even assess ourselves, we assess others. You evaluate people all the time. And not all our perceptions are accurate, and so it's important to evaluate them in terms of how accurate they are, because an incorrect assessment, can cause you, say you think you have a friend who loves to go to parties and you're wrong. You're going to keep inviting them to parties and they keep saying no. Hopefully you update when you're like, oh, maybe they don't like parties. Maybe they're not that kind of extrovert. But that's the idea. All right, so what are the consequences here? Lots of consequences. So there are tons of, I'm going to just say it. So there are tons of consequences of everyday judgment of personality. It impacts your opportunities in terms of employment and friendships. So let me start with kind of an example about shyness and self-assuredness. So there's an example in the book about how shy people can be perceived as cold and aloof. So I encourage you to think about this trait. I lied, not do shyness because, that's in the book. So what about self-assuredness? How might that be perceived by others? Perhaps as rude or conceited. So it impacts, people who are perceived as shy are less likely to, none of this is shocking. There's not a lot of counterintuitive stuff coming. If you're perceived as shy, and that's, people will treat you as shy. So in terms of opportunities, in terms of friends, self-assured people tend to be, more likely to have their opinions, believed. Now, the big one is in expectancies and self-fulfilling prophecies. So, intellectual expectancies. So if you are perceived to be more kind of intelligent, even when you're actually not, there's this cool Rosenthal and Jacobson study that essentially told teachers whether the kid was gonna be was on the verge of flourishing and was just ready to blossom and be super gifted and talented and just needed a little bit of oomph. So what happened was they randomly assigned the kids that were ready to blossom versus not. And teachers treated them differently. So they created kind of a nicer climate, not like weather, temperature, but like in terms of warmer emotional attitudes. The students that were identified as like gifted, on the verge of whatever, were treated better. They were given more feedback, and the feedback they got was more differentiated, so it actually was custom to the student, and was like tailored to them, so it wasn't just generic feedback. That's also why it takes me forever to get your written assignments back, because I give differential feedback on all of them, because it's what I do, because it's effective and it improves outcomes. So in addition, the students that were identified as like able got more input. So teachers attempted to teach them more and more difficult material, and in terms of output, they were given greater opportunities, extra opportunities to show what they know. And these are all reasons why I encourage you to go to office hours. Not mine, but like just in general, because these expectancy and self-fulfilling prophecies type stuff and opportunity, they manifest. And so as much as we wish that, teachers gave everybody as much equal and great attention, unfortunately that's not the reality. So it's very helpful to be perceived as like, to encourage the other faculty to like give you extra attention, because we're swamped, but it's important. So now lastly, because they were given more opportunities, in general, the students that were identified did better. Just full stop, did better. Even though they were equally able, like it was random who was assigned or not. So, which indicates that all those tactics are effective, even when they're not actually based on anything other than a random assignment. Okay, so next is self-fulfilling prophecies. So this is kind of, they're both the same thing, but like depending on who wrote the paper, they call it whatever. So the basic idea here is that behavior is influenced by how others expect us to act, regardless of how we're really like. Hence the intellectual expectancy. They expect you to act smart, so they treat you that way, and it in turn actually helps you get better and smarter. Now, social expectancy, it's kind of an interesting one. So this Snyder paper found that like attractive people were expected to be warm and friendlier, and so they ran this there was this idea that, well, attractive people are treated better. Is it because they're attractive, or is it because they're treated better? Anyway, let me back up. So that's the idea of this study. So what they did was they had a researcher or subjects like talk to like a woman, and they had two different pictures, one which was more attractive and the other which was less. And so depending on which prompt they got, the woman was treated differently, even though like she had a script to follow and all of that. So and also it ends, there's extra layers to this, so I really encourage you to read the book, because I'm not doing it the service it deserves. But so when they had the attractive prompt, they were kind of treated and kind of almost had this expectation to be warm and friendly. And so like the respondent, like the one who was doing the video they were both being recorded. This is 70s, so it was phone calls and recording. But so they were expected to be warm and friendly and treated that way by the student who like saw the pretty versus not pretty face. And how they were treated actually impact how they behaved. So when the prettier woman picture was shown, the respondent was like acted more warm and friendly, and then when they coded them later by like other people rated the like conversation with the more attractive picture as being more warm and friendly and attractive. So it like, even though it was just a picture, it was randomly assigned which one you got. The prettier picture created all of this like nuance and conversation that was then detectable by third parties later. So if you treat someone as pretty and attractive and expect them to be warm and friendly and all this, they'll act that way. And others will see it that way, so they'll think they're pretty. Like, it's not just perceptions of attractiveness, but that one I think is really, really telling. Alright, so more about these expectancies. Like, where do they come from? Obviously, with experiments, they're totally manipulated. But, they come from somewhere. So, like, they're real results of observations. Like either, like, for teachers, it's, like, interactions with them, or, like, observing their behavior with others, or seeing, like, their tests and respondents, or information from acquaintances, interactions with other colleagues. It's like third-hand knowledge. And often they're pretty accurate. They're likely to be correct, so like initially, and then that kind of, they tend to maintain or magnify those perceptions because people are treated that way. And those expectancies are especially like strong and influential when they're held by more than one important person for a long period of time. So if like your boss thinks you're awful and just assume, like, and they convince their assistant to the regional manager that you're also awful, that will have an impact. Other people will think you're awful and treat you awful and send you to like the little annex. Sorry, Toby. For a long time, even though there's like no evidence that like Toby from HR, and I'm talking about The Office, is an actual awful person. I was rewatching it recently and I was like, no, Toby's great. Like there's no like initial cause or anything in the show. He's just treated that way. And so those perpetuate, and as horrible as it is, like, so first impressions make a difference and like build in. So that's why I talk about this, because it's important. Those perceptions make a difference, and you can change them, but like, it's nicer not to have to, or to have people like perceive you a little better than you are, and then you start to act that way. It's kind of cool. So, okay. So that was like, why is this important? Why am I telling you about this? Now let's talk about like the accuracy. So how do we assess accuracy, right? Because that's kind of vague and almost esoteric. So there's two philosophical ways to think about this. The constructivism approach is it's this philosophical view that reality as a concrete identity doesn't exist. So that perception is reality. That only ideas or constructions exist. So however you're perceived is how you are. It's a little not existential. That's how you behave, is who you are. So that's the constructivism definition. The answer for the critical realism definition, the definition for the other kind of approach, is this philosophical view that the absence of perfect, infallible criteria for truth doesn't imply that all interpretations of reality are equally correct. You can probably guess which approach we're going to take, because if we just took a social construction approach, this would be the last slide. But it's not. So we tend to take a critical realism approach because any information is better than no information. And just because you have a perception, that doesn't mean it's real. Okay, so how do we evaluate accuracy? We use the same kind of techniques we use to evaluate the validity of a test. So, for example, convergent validation is the process of assembling diverse pieces of information that ideally converge to a common conclusion. So you get lots of different measures, and you expect them to all hang together. And so if they do, that's strong evidence. That's evidence consistent with accuracy. So self-report versus peer report, if they both point in the same direction, that's compelling. It's not like totally determinative, so I really encourage you to consider divergent validity, so things that are not, like, so kind of have a constellation of measures. So some are supposed to correlate positively, and they do. Others are supposed to correlate negatively, and they do. And some are not supposed to be related. You need to have the not ones in there, because those are just as important. Because if everything correlates, that's okay, that's great. You want to know that it doesn't correlate with stuff too. So, duck test. I love that Funder puts this in here. So the duck test is, if something has several characteristics of a duck, it is likely to be a duck. And the more validity, the more kind of convergence of evidence you have, the more compelling it is that you have that. So if it quacks like a duck, looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, and all the other cutesy anecdotes, it's probably a duck. And so the more evidence you have, the more compelling it is, if they all point in the same direction. But it's also helpful to have evidence that you don't expect to point and have it not point. So next step is inner judgment agreement. So unlike kind of assessments where there's tons of ways to look at agreement, we're just going to focus for accuracy on inner judge agreement, because essentially we're judging people, and so you want judgments from different people to correspond. So inner judge agreement is the degree to which two or more judges of the same person, so judges of the same other person that they're trying to perceive, provide the same descriptions of personality. The more judges that agree, kind of the more likely the judgment is to be correct. So if 15 people think it, that's more likely to be correct than if 1 or 2 people think it. Now, there's never going to be perfect agreement, but you would expect raters to, like for cross people, they rate, extroverted people more extrovertedly on average, and introverted people less extroverted on average. And so those should move together across people. So, in terms of first impressions, these are mostly automatic. And there is some face validity to first impressions. They're not wrong, often. Especially for extroversion, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. Just based on sitting together, not talking at all. Those tend to be pretty accurate. Or at least correlations better than 0.3. Now, we also tend to get pretty good accurate judgments for dominance versus submissive just from like faces. There's some cool pictures in the book that I can't reproduce up here because they're copyrighted. But people can make accurate first impressions even from faces. Now, the research that does this is pretty cool. It's it does have some problems, but what they do is they examine composites of people, and you can see the difference. It's cool. Look, they're not perfect, and there are some huge problems with these techniques, especially when it comes to sexual orientation, because the study they did, it had it ignored bisexual people, which is always a thing. It was really gay, or it's very binary, but they found that women who were gay wore less makeup. Shocking. And men looked a little more you'll have to see it. It's not perfect, but it illustrates that there is something to be inferred from self-presentation, as well as the accuracy of faces as a means of first impression. They took composite faces from extreme scores, so super extroverted people, super introverted people. So it's illustrated that it can be done, not that it's super accurate, for the average person. So fun facts. Same thing for low versus high agreeableness and extroversion. For male faces, emotional stability was another one. They couldn't do it for everything. Again, look at the pictures. They're really cool. And also hopefully makes you aware of what kind of data Facebook uses and gives to researchers. Alright, so there are other visible signs of personality. So extroverts tend to have a little bit more fashionable dress. In the before times, they used to have more stylish haircuts. They tended to speak in a louder voice. I would argue I would say now it's less likely that stylish haircut is predictive. If anything, it's probably, depending on where you're at, like maybe conscientiousness in like the reverse direction. I could see that, well, if just the act of having a haircut or not. But it gets political really fast with that. Okay, so openness to experience, like the variety of reading material. So when you look at like Zoom interviews, and you see how many like and what kinds of books people have in their background, there's got to be a study ongoing where someone in Sam Gosling's lab is like coding various like still images from like celebrity interviews and like even just undergraduate interviews to like see if this still holds up with Zoom. I suspect that that'll be a cool study when it comes out. Now, lastly, you got conscientiousness, so neatness of a bedroom, bed made, neat overall. But also, if you're like having a generally messy room, is also associated with like lower levels of extroversion because you're less out and about, so you're just in your home more, which is kind of neat that it's not always like the obvious kind of idea. So other visible signs of personality, musical preferences, inventive, imaginative, tolerant, and liberal people tend to like reflective, complex music. Let's see. Curious, risk-taking, and physically attractive people tend to like aggressive and intensive music. In terms of storytelling, sophisticated writing and creativity are signs of openness. Using words related to positive emotions and social orientation are signs of agreeableness. And in the before times, handshake firmness was positively associated with extroversion and just emotional expressiveness in general, and negatively associated with shyness and anxiety. So the handshake is actually a really actual telling sign of personality, which I think is kind of neat. I imagine so like there is a good reason why they do it. It's telling. Weak handshake, probably shy and anxious. Strong handshake, probably not. Now I think it's more a measure of risk aversion. Okay, so that was the first half of personality judgments. This is a pretty short unit. So we're almost done. Next time we're going to talk about moderators of accuracy. What are the things that influence how accurate our perceptions are? And kind of go through a basic model of like where that information can get lost, essentially. Okay, so that's it for this episode. I will see you in the next one. And thanks for watching! I'm gonna disappear off screen so that I can make a nice clean cut of this video. Obviously, super great at being hidden.